Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 728 for September 27th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
I said, this will either get me the job or this will have you not offer me the job. Is that I trespassed in one of your distilleries already. So I did get to go in. It was awesome. It was worth the wait.
Back in the spring of 2016, Holly Seidewand emailed me. She was planning a year-long trip to Scotland and Japan to learn more about whiskey, and she wanted to know how I developed my love for whiskey. Well, Holly has now turned her own passion for whiskey into a career, and she's become a U.S. brand ambassador for the Dewar's single malts range of whiskeys from Aberfeldy, Altmore, Craigellachie, Royal Brackla, and Glendeveron. I'll talk with Holly about making the transition from whiskey lover to whiskey professional later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's coming up later, along with the calendar of events, your voice, and in the What I'm Tasting This Week department, I'll have some tasting notes that might just get me a punch in the nose. It's all just ahead on the midweek edition of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's start with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And we're going to have to start with Brexit, since we're almost exactly 6 months away now from Great Britain's departure from the European Union, scheduled for March 31st, 2019, with or without an exit deal in place. As of right now, the odds are growing that there will not be a deal in place to outline how Great Britain and the EU will work together after the divorce. And as any divorce lawyer will tell you, that is a recipe for disaster. What does this mean for whiskey lovers? Well, since whiskey is covered under the World Trade Organization's tariff-free trade rules, Scotch whiskey lovers in Europe will not see taxes rise as a direct result of Brexit, though the costs of shipping whiskey from Scotland to the continent might well go up because of logistics issues, and that could lead to higher prices. However, Scotch whiskey and other UK food products will not be automatically covered under the European Union's Geographical Indicator Protection System after Brexit. Prime Minister Theresa May's government said this week that the UK will set up its own geographical indicator system, but the Scotch whiskey industry will likely have to reapply for protection in the rest of Europe. Since the status of the Irish border still has not been resolved, we don't know yet whether a hard border will be reestablished between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, though May's government said this week that Irish whiskey will be fully protected in the UK after Brexit. Meanwhile, we now have the date for UK Chancellor Philip Hammond's budget address. It'll be October 29th, and as we reported earlier this month, the Scotch Whisky Association is fighting its annual battle to keep taxes on whiskey from rising. As a matter of fact, today, September 27th, is the day the industry is celebrating what it calls Duty Paid Day, the day that theoretically UK whiskey drinkers have paid all of the excise duty on Scotch sold in the UK for the entire year. That's because about 74% of the price of an average bottle of Scotch sold in the UK goes to taxes. SWA Chief Executive Karen Betts says taxation at that rate is unsustainable and threatens future investment in the industry. Meanwhile, U.S. distillers are fighting their own tax battle on Capitol Hill. The tax reform legislation passed last December gave distillers a cut in their federal excise taxes on the first 100,000 gallons of spirit they remove from bond each year. However, that tax cut expires 15 months from now, and industry groups are racing to beat the clock and make the tax cut permanent. Time is running out, though, on the end of the current congressional session. Lawmakers are heading home in the coming days for the November 6th elections, and there has been little to no progress so far on making the federal excise tax cut permanent, either before the elections or in a lame duck session after November 6th. Small-scale distillers have received the most benefit from the tax break, and Margie Lehrman of the American Craft Spirits Association has been busy in Washington showing lawmakers the economic impact.
It's not only about the job creation, and it's not only about the reinvestment into equipment and building out the distillery rooms. This is an industry that is creating career professionals with professional benefits. And there's one distillery that came to me to say, we're in danger of taking away our new paternity leave, paid paternity leave, unless you continue to make this reduction permanent. Just keep going to fight. So I think the good news is that the industry, in terms of overall investment, is strong. The reinvestment from FET we hope to have in perpetuity beyond 2019.
The ACSA, Park Street, and the IWSR, the International Wine and Spirits Report, released their annual craft spirits data report Tuesday in New York City with details on craft distilling's growth over the past year. The number of operating craft distillers in the U.S. is now up by 15.5% over last year to a total of 1,835. And there are now craft distillers operating in every one of the 50 U.S. states. Craft distillers now have around 3.2% of the U.S. spirits market, but the biggest change this year has been that the industry has reached what researchers call an inflection point. That growth is coming more now from increased volume in sales than it is from the number of new distilleries coming online. Adam Rogers of the IWSR says that market share might seem small, but that's also because of the ACSA's own arbitrary limits on members, with an annual maximum of 750,000 proof gallons of spirit removed from bond.
The market share is growing, and if you take away the actual criteria that it can't be over 400,000 cases, it's upwards of a 20 million case industry. So we're kind of putting a cap on our limitation based on the classification and the criteria of the ACSA, which is important to keep the members small to medium size. But the overall industry itself is roughly 20 million cases if you take everyone into account.
The ACSA also has limits on corporate ownership, and with the number of craft distillers being sold to major spirits companies in the last couple of years, those distilleries are not being counted in this annual survey. Rogers estimated Tuesday that adding distilleries like Westland, Smooth Ambler, and others back into the 2018 data could nearly double that 3.2% market share for craft distilling. Of course, those distillers do produce more than just whiskey. Whiskey accounts for about 33% of all U.S. craft spirits sales, while vodka sales make up 28%. The rest is divided up among gin, brandy, and other distilled spirits. Meanwhile, their colleagues in Scotland are taking craft out of the industry group's name. The Scottish Craft Distillers Association rebranded itself this past week as the Scottish Distillers Association. Its 21 members produce other spirits as well as whiskey and are looking to get similar protections for Scottish place names that the Scotch Whisky Association enforces on behalf of the whiskey industry. Distillers Association Chairman Alan Wolstenholme wants to make sure distillers are making reasonable claims about the location where their products are made. For instance, not suggesting that a gin comes from Islay when it's actually distilled in Glasgow. Now, as one of the world's best-selling whiskey brands, Jack Daniel's will not usually be found in the craft spirits section of your local liquor store, but that does not mean that there is no craftsmanship going on in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and the proof is in the newest limited edition release from Jack Daniel's. Heritage Barrel is an extension of the Jack Daniel's single barrel, and it uses specially coopered barrels from the Brown-Forman cooperage in Louisville, Kentucky. Master distiller Jeff Arnett says the idea was to try and recreate the type of barrels that would have been used back when Jack Daniel and Nearest Green were making whiskey in Lynchburg.
they would have had to have burned the inside of the barrel out using some type of a hand device. And I would imagine that they were probably satisfied in just seeing a little bit of discoloration on the inside of the barrel. So that's more what I would call a toasted barrel and not so much a charred barrel. So those would have been more the norm of Jack's earliest days. Also, over time, entry proofs in the barrels have changed, largely have gone up a little bit. So in making this product, we were like, let's see if we can't mimic maybe a barrel that would have come from the 1860s, something that has a very, very high toast level in it, has a minimal char, just enough to satisfy the law, because it does need to be a charred oak barrel to be, a bourbon or a Tennessee whiskey. But let's also drop the entry proof. So normally that would be 125, that's industry standard, but we dropped it in this case down to a 100. Pretty significant, but we felt like, hey, this will maximize the unique toasted flavors of the barrel. So we didn't necessarily want to do much dilution. We knew after we came out of the barrel, it's typical, especially if a barrel's on the top floor of a warehouse in Lynchburg, that we're going to rise in proof. So we've watched these over the years go from, starting at 100 to 102 to 104. I think the exit proof on these are up closer to about 107 or 108. So all we've done with this particular Heritage barrel is just correct the proof back to its original entry proof. So it was barreled at 100 proof, and it's bottled at 100 proof. And we also ran it as a single barrel type product, so you can explore the nuances of the individual barrels at the same time.
So how long have you been working on this project?
This one dates back to 2012. Was when we first got these barrels in. So we got them in the early summer. Went ahead and filled them, and we let these sit. So they're between 6 and 7 years old. I would say they have at least almost half of a seventh cycle on them. We don't typically sell anything on its age, but that was clearly part of wanting to make a product like this. We wanted it to be rich and very barrel mature. With the warm summers and cold winters that we've had, this is going to have a lot of barrel character for sure.
Jack Daniel's Heritage Barrel will be available in very limited quantities, since the cooperage only made one set of those toasted barrels. But unlike other limited edition Jack Daniel's bottlings, this one will not be sold at the distillery's shop in Lynchburg. Jeff Arnett told me the idea was to get as many bottles out to retailers as possible. It'll carry a recommended retail price of around $65 a bottle. Other new whiskeys to mention: Inverhouse is releasing a new 16-year-old Speyburn single malt for the global travel retail market. It's matured in ex-bourbon barrels and bottled at 43% ABV. It'll sell for 72 euros, or around $84 a bottle. Baltimore's Sagamore Spirit is releasing 2 new rye whiskeys, a port finish that uses port casks from wineries in both Portugal and Maryland. It'll sell for around $70 a bottle. There's also a new double oak straight rye that takes 4-year-old whiskey and re-racks it into new oak barrels for a few months. It'll sell for around $60 a bottle. And we have sad details on a whiskey that is disappearing from the market. I've had a number of questions over the last several months about rumors that Heaven Hill's 6-year-old bottled in bond bourbon was being discontinued. The rumors, unfortunately, are true. Heaven Hill said on Tuesday that demand for American whiskey has forced it to drop some of its regional brands over the last several years, and that's the case with the Heaven Hill 6-year-old bottled in bond bourbon, which has only been available in Kentucky in recent years. Finally, the Whiskey Show this weekend in London has some of the rarest whiskeys in the world on hand, but you won't be able to taste them, no matter how much you beg. That's because they're on display ahead of a charity auction in November. Whisky.auction, which is part of the Specialty Drinks family, along with the Whiskey Show, is holding the online auction to raise money for Plastic Oceans International, a group that's working to cut down on the amount of plastic products that wind up polluting the oceans. Whisky.auction's Isabel Graham-Ewell says all of the whiskeys have been donated by distilleries and bottlers, including some bottled especially for this auction.
We've got a Karazawa 50-year-old. There's never been anything older. We've got Port Ellen, which I think there's one of maybe 2 bottles that have ever been produced of this. It's being bottled specifically for this auction. Never been seen before whiskies. And that's the caliber. I'm just picking out 1 or 2, which is unfair because they're all so at that level. Brora, Macallan, Balvenie, Dalmore, the list goes on. And also some really rare rums as well. These are some 1 of 1 or 1 of 2, 1 of 3. Really, I don't like to use the word rare because effectively everything's rare, but sometimes it really is.
How will the auction work? It's scheduled through Whisky.auction online in November, correct?
That's right. So the auction runs as our usual online auctions. You'll be able to begin previewing them online on the 14th of November. And the auction goes live a few days later on the 18th of November. And it's open to anyone to bid. So anyone in the world can bid to buy one of the rarest whiskies ever. Bidding starts at £5, so it's pretty democratic.
At the beginning, of course.
At the beginning, but I think there may be. I mean, apart from these ultra rare whiskies, I think there's some distilleries who maybe didn't have anything suitable, but were keen to donate something. So there will be some more
affordable.
Affordable. I was trying to use my words carefully. Yeah. Affordable whiskies,
accessible.
Still sought after,
let's
rare.
use accessible.
Accessible, yeah. It's one person's accessible and affordable is someone else is, what, you spend that much on whiskey? But, I'm talking to a whiskey community here, so I don't need to explain it. It's one of the most exciting things I've been involved with, and with excitement being able to do something like this. All proceeds will go to Plastic Ocean, so all profits from the auction, and the buyer's commission included. So we couldn't really be more excited about an auction. It's such a biggie.
If you can't make it to the Whisky Show in London this weekend, we have a link to the Whisky.auction website for more details on the auction. It runs from November 18th through the 27th, and the goal is to raise £200,000 for Plastic Oceans International. You'll find that link in our show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com, and that's also where you can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. If you're heading out on a voyage of your own soon, look for Highland Park's new travel retail lineup as you're traveling, including the new Highland Park 18-year-old Viking Pride Travel Edition. Check out the entire lineup at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville, Kentucky has a fun event on Monday night, pairing spirits with Halloween candy. That ought to be interesting. Texas will be busy next week. The McAllen Manor Tour stops in Austin on the 2nd and 3rd, while Beam's Bourbon Legends Boxcar Tour will be in Houston on the 3rd and 4th. Amrut's American Tour wraps up next Wednesday night at Shoujo in Boston, the night before the Whiskey Extravaganza at the Hyatt Regency in Boston. Teeling Whiskey Company's Dublin Rising The Culture Edition is next Thursday night. Saturday, October 6th, brings the York Whiskey Festival in England and the Nashville Whiskey Festival in Tennessee. The Chicago Independent Spirits Expo is on October 9th, followed by Whiskey Live Chicago on the 11th. And the Whiskey Lounge kicks off a new series of quiz nights in the UK at pubs in London and Newcastle on the 11th as well. Right now, we have 204 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. Just use the search button to find events in your area or where you'll be traveling soon.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. Over the years, we've told the stories of several people who took their love for whiskey and turned it into a career. Back in March of 2016, I received an email from Holly Seidewand. She asked how I figured out that whiskey was more than just a hobby for me, and said that she was planning to spend a year visiting distilleries in Scotland and Japan to learn not just about whiskey, but about the history and culture in both countries. Back then, I told her that I envied her, since I'd love to be able to travel like that for an entire year, and told her to keep in touch. Well, she did more than just learn about whiskeys. Earlier this year, she joined Bacardi as a U.S. brand ambassador for the John Dewar & Sons range of single malts, which we talked about back in episode 507 when they were introduced in November of 2014. A lot has happened for Holly since that first email, and we spent some time on the phone a few days ago catching up on her journey. When you first emailed me back in the spring of 2016, tell me where you were in your life at that point and how you were getting into whiskey, and then let's go through the story from there over the last couple of years.
Sure. It feels like, well, first, thanks for having me and taking interest in my story. I was definitely a newbie, specifically to the industry side. When I first wrote to you, I was just a consumer that happened to love whiskey and went to a lot of tastings and seminars and things like that. But spring of 2016, I had just quit my job in California. I was living in Oakland and working essentially in store design. So I had done this for the past few years after my MBA via New York or now in California. And it was great. I worked a lot in watch and jewelry. We would work with the brand teams, got to learn a lot about brands. But I was not super passionate about watch and jewelry and consumer electronics. So I had taken a liking to whiskey throughout the years because I was essentially in manufacturing. So it was a big part of my business meetings, client meetings, when we would do factory audits in Asia. And so I started collecting a bit here or there and would go to different tastings. And so I decided on the weekends out in California, I would take the WSET. So I started in that, which was a great program, but definitely geared towards viticulture. And I was also taking it at UC Davis, which I was definitely in the wrong area. Now you have Sonoma Distilling and others, but at the time it was still, St. George was the only thing really going on out there. So I decided, all right, I wrote an 11-step plan, and I said, I'm really interested in this. I'm not getting what I want. I didn't want to go to some moonshine university at the time. And so I've actually achieved all of the 11 steps in this plan I wrote in about 5 seconds. The last step was to open a distillery, which I have not done, but I have my whole life ahead of me. So there's still time to deal with that. But in this plan, I said, if there's one thing my parents taught me is sometimes all you can do is show up and work hard. And that's proved me well through my career and through my life at that point. And so I planned my own mini, what I called whiskey education program. So I left that job, went back to New York, where I had to be the maid of honor for my sister's wedding. That was mandatory. And so I put everything in storage, got out of my lease, drove across the country, and 2 months after my sister's wedding, I would be landing in Scotland. So that was 2016, the start of the whiskey journey.
And what was it like being an American woman in Scotland on your own and just showing up out of the blue, hoping to learn everything you could about whiskey? How were you received?
Well, at first, think of how anyone would be received. I basically was this girl with a backpack. I looked like an 8-year-old going to 3rd grade. I showed up in my Toms and my sneakers because I had a lot of walking to do. And I planned 2 or 3 distillery visits a day. I would end up doing 1 a day so that I could spend more time at them. And I would have my notebook. And so basically it was just me, my backpack, and my notebook showing up at distilleries, and no one really made note of me at first. They just kind of thought, well, she is maybe a chemist or she's into something. So at first, no one really took note of me, but I had started this blog in the meantime as well. It was called Her Whiskey Love. And I had actually originally decided to start this blog and document my journeys, more so that my family, I could prove to them that I was actually learning something and not just going over to Scotland to drink whiskey. So
not that there's anything wrong with that, but
no. And I've gone back many times and not taken out the notebook and just drank whiskey. But it was more. I never thought anyone would really read it. It was just a way for me to document my travels, so that I could prove to my family that I was out there to learn something. So I needed those notes for my blog, and as I went to, probably after about the first 10 to 15 distilleries, I was actually able to start asking more intricate questions. So in the beginning, I was really just observing. I hadn't been to a lot of distilleries. And so I was, getting the regular tours, just walking around. I was drawing the stills in my notebook, writing down everything I possibly could. And then after about 15, I would say, I actually was able to hold a conversation with the tour guide or whoever I was with. And so once I started asking those questions, that's when people started to take notice of me with my notebook. And so that's when I sort of had to tell people what I was doing. But, to this day, every distillery I visit, I learn something new, because a lot of times people would say, oh, you've been to one, you know what's going on. And it's actually not the case. And I've revisited distilleries multiple times, and I learn something new every time. So I was definitely coined as that American girl that's going to be coming to your distillery. So I did have a few people know that I was on the way to the distillery. Specifically, this was during the Brown-Forman takeover of Glendronach, Ben Riach, and Glenglassaugh. And I remember I had just shown up to, I believe I had just left Glendronach and had a great visit there, and I was headed up to Glenglassaugh. And I arrived at Glenglassaugh, and mind you, unfortunately, Glenglassaugh doesn't get as many visitors as they should. It's an incredible whiskey, but the person that was running the front desk had actually of the visitor center had received a call letting them know that I was on my way. So I was definitely, people started to take notice that there was this American girl traveling around, but they also probably thought I worked for Brown-Forman and was spying on them of some sort, which I told them very quickly I wasn't. But yeah, so they were very accepting of me, though. People loved what I was doing. They loved my curiosity, and there were definitely whiskey blogs and people like me that had come through before, but they were more than happy to entertain my questions and recommend people to me, and also spend extra time with me as well.
Did anybody turn you away?
It's funny that you asked that. I was just on the Bacardi training, and someone was asking me, where there has to be one place that was not nice to you, that didn't want to talk to you, and I honestly, and I thought about it, no one turned me away. I actually, ironically, but it was in a very pleasant manner, and I was in the wrong, but Altmore, one of the distilleries I now represent, Altmore, I had kept passing it when going through Speyside and on some of the back roads, because mind you, 3 months in Scotland, you start to take a lot of the same roads. And I really wanted to go in, and they don't allow visitors. And so I thought, I really want to go in. I keep passing it. And I thought, well, what's the worst thing? And this is very illegal, and I don't recommend it. But I thought, I'll pull up, I'll park, and I just want to see the stills, because they have the open garage door stills. I just want some photos. And so I did wander around Altmore, and I was asked to leave. That's the only time I was actually kicked out of a distillery I now work for and represent. But they were very pleasant. They just said, there's only 2 people working here. This is a hazard. You can't be here. So that's really all I can think of. But everyone was very welcoming. I mean, obviously some were more eager to chat with me than others, but it's I still was learning something, and still, like I said, tried to represent America the best I could.
Now that you're working with Dewar's and Bacardi, have you been back to Altmore, and did they remember you?
I did go back to Altmore. I didn't ask. I was a little bit, Georgie knew who took us through, but I was a little nervous that maybe someone would recognize me, but no one recognized me. And I actually said that when I was first talking with Bacardi to take the role, and I said, this will either get me the job or this will have you not offer me the job. Is that I trespassed in one of your distilleries already. So I did get to go in. It was awesome. It was worth the wait. But no, they did not recognize me.
How did you wind up getting the job with Dewar's and Bacardi?
It was an interesting ride. So basically with Her Whiskey Love, the original plan was Scotland, Ireland, Japan, and then to come back and do Kentucky and Tennessee, which, I mean, you're barely even nowadays touching the surface of what whiskey is out there globally. So that took me about 8 months to do those regions. And it was incredible. And I ended up adding on Tasmania and Australia as well at the end of that, just due to some connections. But what was really interesting is that I necessarily didn't fit a brand ambassador background at that point, right? I had such a unique and vast background that I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that. I could, maybe writing, but I didn't know if journalism was for me. And, I'm more of a creative writer. And so what happened was I actually was offered a position on Instagram. There was a retail chain in Boston that had been watching my travels. And I was ideal for a retail chain because, you touch on every brand. So, I was a shoo-in for that because I had been to the Japanese distilleries. I had, I'd been to Sullivan's Cove. I had been to all the Scottish distilleries. I was able to speak to basically everything on the shelf. And so I came back and did that for about a year. And throughout my time, brand ambassador work had come up, but I wasn't always sure, now that I have this love and passion for New World whiskey and all these different whiskeys, I didn't want to put that education to the side. And so a brand ambassador role, I thought, well, that's not for me because then I have to focus on a portfolio or one brand. And I don't know if I can do that. I have love for lots of different styles of whiskey. And so I had been approached by a few people and decided that it wasn't the right fit. And then I had a good friend who actually worked for Remy and now works for Teeling out in California, who was actually my first believer of my whiskey education program. His name's Frank. I'll give him a shout out. He's been my biggest advocate since I basically was a Glenlivet drinker, which is a great whiskey, but I've moved on to other things since then. And so he gave me a call one day and he said, I need your resume. Bacardi's starting a new incubation program for single malt. You have to help launch it. And so I thought, well, this guy has been, if he left, and wanted to go work for Bacardi, there has to be something going on over there. There's something happening. And so I met with the director the next day. And for me, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit entrepreneurial. I like to create things and develop programs from scratch and see where they take me. I like that sense of adventure. And that's basically what Bacardi has done with these malts. And although they were, I guess, soft launched as the last great malts in 2014, there's never really been any education around them. And for me, I was like, if I get to be the first true voice in North America for these malts, how awesome is that? And they're incredible whiskeys. The portfolio is quite vast, and so I thought this is my opportunity to actually make a difference in a portfolio and really grow these brands to what they should be and to their potential. So it was more of that entrepreneurial itch that got me thinking I could really do a lot with this portfolio. It's fun to me when someone, you're with a buyer, a well-known buyer, and they didn't even know these whiskeys existed, half of them. So to me, that's exciting.
Now, one of the things you got to do, and I want to know how you pulled this off. How did you get Gordon Bruce at Knockdhu to let you intern with him? Because we've had Gordon on the show a few times before, and let's just say Gordon can be shall we say, a little crusty, perhaps, a little profane at times. Great distiller, great guy, but probably not the most outgoing human being on the planet.
I would have to say, though, he's quite the jokester when he wants to be. He definitely, it's just a different sense of humor. And I think,
and I love Gordon. He's a great guy. He's a great guy, but he is not, I don't see him as the mentoring type. Let's put it that way.
And to be honest, I come from a sales background. And so I remember being Knock Do at that time, who makes a knock, had really just started saying, hey, we're open for consumer tours. So I had to go by myself. There was no one else signed up for the walk around. And I just fell in love with the distilleries, obviously worm tubs. And then I had so many questions, really eager. And Gordon happened to be walking by. And I had told the tour guide that I was scheduled to take the General Certificate in Distillation through the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. And, I said, I'm hoping all these visits will help me pass my exam. And she said, oh, well, this is a distillery manager. He, is close with the IBD. Let me just, let you say hello. And so we got to talking and ended up going back to his office and sampling whiskeys together. And, maybe it was me kind of being bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, but he took some sort of liking to me, and he said, really the only way to secure that you're going to pass that exam is you have to take the 6 a.m. shift here at Knock Do. And I will say that this is probably a huge liability for Gordon. I hope he doesn't get in trouble for this. We were very safe. I wore my closed-toed shoes. All was good, but I said, I'll be there. And so we planned when I could start, and everyone that works there was so welcoming to me. And I must say that is the reason that I passed the GCD, was that hands-on experience of, actually working with the grains, checking the grains, working through the whole process. So I'm so thankful to them. I keep in touch with him. I help support his son's band whenever I can, and I keep in touch with the team as well. So very thankful to him for that.
And I'm kidding about Gordon. He is a great guy, but he can be somewhat crusty. He can be somewhat profane. And it's just a fun combination. I love hanging out with Gordon, but I'm going, wow, how'd you get that deal?
Once you see his pups running alongside, you can see he's actually got a huge heart.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just So yes, I was very fortunate for that experience. And I definitely, I've done a bit of, day trainings and, just kind of refreshing my skills with some awesome people in Tasmania. And, when people open up their world to you like that, there's really no way to thank them, because that really took my career for a turn. That got me in touch with some people at Middleton. It helped me with Jerry Avis at IBD, made me look good. So I'm very thankful for the team for that.
So you got 10 out of the 11 items on the bucket list, right?
Yes.
Number 11 is opening a distillery. Can you still see yourself doing that in a few years?
I would never say never. I actually, this is a really, really bad joke, and I'm a huge proponent of American whiskey and American single malt. I definitely am partial to single malt. So, you'll see that in my writing. It comes across as well. I say that, I'm going to wait at least a few more years, because there'll probably be some equipment available for sale. It might be on discount instead of waiting in line for Vendôme. I definitely I want to wait and see where some of the legislation goes with American single malt. And I don't know exactly where I'd want to do it, but originally the plan was to make American single malt in Lake Tahoe. So, there were a lot of business ideas that I would have to figure out, but you never know. I'm a big fan of the mountains, so wherever it could be, it's going to be definitely in the mountains somewhere.
Holly still blogs at her whiskylove.com, and we've posted a link to her blog in our show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distiller's Edition, the throwback 8-year-old, and this year's edition of the cask-strength 12-year-old Lagavulin, coming soon to a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Holly sent me a sample of an Aberfeldy single cask hand-filled bottling that she brought back from her last trip to the distillery. This 1999 single cask was pulled out of the warehouse last month for hand bottling in the distillery's Visitors Center. It's a sherry cask at 57% ABV. The nose is intense with dark fruits, plums, raisins, toffee, oak tannins, and just a hint of brandy. The taste is thick, chewy, almost crunchy, in fact, with notes of clove, licorice, a hint of anise, plums, raisin bread, honey, and a hint of oak tannins. The finish is long, rich, and complex with dark fruits, licorice, and lingering hints of spice. I have always had a soft spot for Aberfeldy single malts, and I'm scoring the 1999 single cask number 3 a 93. During the news, we heard from Jeff Arnett of Jack Daniel's about the new Heritage Barrel single barrel bottling. Once again, it's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose is gentle and creamy with notes of creme brulee, vanilla, honey, and butterscotch. The taste starts off with touches of caramel cola and vanilla at first, followed by a good pepperiness that is not overpowering, along with honey, butterscotch, and just a hint of oak. The finish has lingering spices and a gentle sweetness. I'm scoring the Jack Daniel's Heritage Barrel a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, family-owned from the start, and proud to work with other family-owned companies on the Grain to Glass project. They're working with Beck's Hybrid and Peterson Farms to find unique seeds, grow them, and distill them into a special whiskey. Follow the project at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Next up, I received a bottle of Highland Park's new Valknut single malt this week. It is the second release in the Viking series, and the name Valknut comes from the mark said to have been placed on worthy Viking warriors to ensure their entry into Valhalla. It's bottled at 46.8% ABV, and the nose is malty with a gentle heathery peatiness, creme brulee, touches of fig cookies and toffee, subtle spices, and a bit of honey. The taste is peppery with cloves, anise, and a gentle whiff of heathery peat smoke that comes out after the initial burst of spices fades. There are nice touches of malt and oak that balance out the smokiness, along with a subtle hint of grilled fruits that lasts through the finish. I'm scoring the Highland Park Valknut a 93. Okay, let's get this one over with. On Monday, I received a bottle of Proper No. 12, the new Irish whiskey from MMA champion Conor McGregor and Bushmills head distiller David Elder. It is a blend of malt and grain whiskeys bottled at 40% ABV, and right now it's only available in Ireland at Tesco stores and in the U.S. For the record, a spokesperson for McGregor's Spirits Company says there is no Bushmills whiskey in the blend. The nose is malty and aromatic with honey, vanilla, burnt caramel, a hint of butterscotch, and a touch of charred oak. The taste is fruity and tart with peaches, green apples, a hint of citrus, mild spices, and touches of honey and vanilla in the background. The finish has a lingering tartness and soft spices with touches of honey and butterscotch. I'm not going to mince words here. I really wanted to like this one. However, it is a bit one-dimensional with not much in the way of complexity, sort of like a fighter who's only effective with the right hand. It is drinkable, clean, crisp, and it doesn't have any flaws, but it is also not a knockout. And with the Bushmills team backing it, I expected better. I'm scoring Conor McGregor's Proper 12 an 84. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,300 different whiskeys from around the world. You'll find it at WhiskyCast.com.
This is Whisky. Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. This is what they sound like.
Because you're a cheeky wee blighter.
Dance like. Aye, like that. This is what they do all day. Building the great character of Johnny Walker Black Label. Aging in oak for 12 long years.
Thanks. Oh, it's gorgeous there.
What is character? It's giving a damn.
You're alright, lassie.
Which looks like this, as much as this. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes.
Put the bloody game on the telly, Ella.
A whiskey as bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Cut.
Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whisky. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. I have to give our pal Fred Minnick props for this tweet. If liquor stores ran specials like Joseph A. Bank, what would the deal look like? Now, if you're not familiar with Joseph A. Bank, it's a men's clothing chain in the U.S. that always seems to have some kind of a sale going on. 60% off, buy one, get one free, things like that. But the regular prices are usually higher than you'd expect to pay. So my response to Fred, the liquor store equivalent would be pricing bourbon at $150 a bottle, but it'd always be on sale for 60% off. Our interview last week with Castle and Key's Marianne Eves brought this tweet from @ViciousVinifera. Too cool hearing Marianne BMD on WhiskyCast. I had such fun interviewing her for Skepchicks a while back. And you'll find that interview with Marianne on skepchicks.org. When I mentioned on Twitter that I'd be reviewing Proper 12 on this episode, Mike Horton at Single Pot Mike came on strong with the snark. Here's his tweet. Haven't you already done a review of Bushmills? Be nice, Mike. This is the one whiskey where a really bad review could get me an ass-kicking the next time I'm in Dublin. I managed to get back into the middle of the whiskey with an E or whiskey without the E debate online again. This seems to happen about every week or so these days. And for the record, around here we spell it without the E on the WhiskyCast website most of the time. The exception is when we're referring to a specific brand that does use the E in whiskey, or with Irish whiskies, since for the moment they're all spelled with an E, though that is likely to change when Mark Rainier's Waterford distillery starts releasing its single malt in a few years. I pointed out on Twitter that when one only has 280 characters to work with in a tweet, every character matters, and leaving out the E in whiskey might mean not having to edit a tweet so that it comes out coherent. Besides, how come the British spell whiskey without an E, but shit has one? Naturally, the Twitterverse came up with the answer. Our friend the Reverend R.M. Peluso of chocolate and whiskey fame had this response. The E in whiskey has no phonological significance, whereas, assuming the I in shite is pronounced as a long I, the spelling distinguishes it phonologically from the American pronunciation. You learn all sorts of things when you talk about whiskey. Now, if you have something you'd like to learn, or you just want to share your own knowledge with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always check in with us online. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and you can also use the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com. You can also email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Behind the Label is our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. And this time around, we're proud to welcome a new sponsor to WhiskyCast for Behind the Label. The folks at Writer's Tears Irish Whiskey have come on board to bring you this segment in each episode. Jameson Cobley emailed us this week. In episode 727, you mentioned the Glenfarclas 105, which is 105 Old British proof. My questions are, how did the Old British proof system differ from what we use today? Why and when did it change? Are there any other systems, and why do we even have proof at all when we have ABV? Well, fortunately, I've got a good reference library of whiskey books, and was able to get the answer to this one pretty easily, thanks to Charles MacLean and his book MacLean's Miscellany of Whiskey. The old story about proof comes from the method of mixing a distilled spirit with gunpowder and then trying to ignite it. If the mixture caught on fire, that was proof that the spirit had enough alcohol in it. But if the mixture did not ignite, the spirit was said to be under proof. Though, as Charlie points out, that wasn't the most reliable method, since using too much liquid would keep the flame from burning anyway. The old British proof system that was in place from 1818 until 1980 was based on measuring the specific gravity of alcohol compared to water at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a complicated formula, and I'll spare you the math since it hasn't been used in decades. However, what is important here is that pure alcohol was defined under that old system as 175 proof, and the Glenfarclas 105 was 105 proof under that system, which is 60% alcohol. That system was replaced in 1980 when the European Union adopted the international standard for measuring alcohol by volume. At that time, the old British proof standards were converted to ABV, with the legal minimum bottling strength for whiskey going from 70 proof to 40% ABV. The U.S. does still use proof in its legal standards for whiskey and other distilled spirits, but defines it as twice the ABV. So, a 100 proof bottled in bond whiskey would be 50% alcohol. However, labels for whiskeys sold in the U.S. do not legally have to include the proof. They have to include the ABV strength, but adding the proof in is optional. Jameson, I hope this answers your question. Meanwhile, if you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode at whiskycast.com. You'll also find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of past episodes dating back to 2005. Please take a minute this week and share WhiskyCast with a friend. If you have to, take their smartphone and show them how to use the podcast app to find a world of free content, including WhiskyCast. Remember, friends don't let friends miss out on podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Get in touch with us on all of the major social media platforms, or you can email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.